Hey, it's Pat here today. I am so looking forward to this conversation because we've been planning this for quite some time. I am here today with Chris Murray of Joe DeClassified, and we are going to be covering everything that you may have ever wanted to know about eco warriors and more. Yeah, if you don't know Chris Murray is an extremely legitimate G.I. Joe collector. He's also an archaeologist, and if you see him on Facebook, he's going through caves. So in many ways, considering the adventure team, Chris is a real life GI Joe as well.
Uh,
I don't know. I think the argument could be made, Chris.
well, I appreciate it.
But you could just see from him sitting there that he has a love of GI Joe and the history of GI Joe. And every time I get the chance to talk to him, it's a great time because I learn so much. Why don't you tell us though what Joe Declassified is all about?
Well, Joda Classified is a registered 501c3 nonprofit organization founded by GI Joe fans. Myself, Pat, Sam, about 15 other people. But basically, our mission is to build a better community by creating friendships, unearthing history, doing the research, and sharing that research with the fans.
So if you've been to any of the conventions, we often have like a booth set up.
Come see us at Assembly Required, Joe Fest, SoCal, some other shows we try to go to as well. We do take these international prototypes, international licensed items, rare things that a lot of people don't have the ability to own, and we set up a museum display. We don't sell anything; it's simply there just to share and discuss GI Joe with the people in attendance.
We always end up learning something there too. That's probably the most rewarding part of this is that the sharing results in further understanding and knowledge. It's a lot of fun.
Mhm. Mhm.
First, I guess we can talk about what the Eco Warriors were about.
So, if you were to read the inserts catalog that came with the figures that year, the first year, 1991, the catalog described the Eco Warriors by stating this blurb here. Cobra has unleashed a crushing blow to the Earth, dumping tons of hazardous toxic sludge into the environment in their quest for world domination. G.I. Joe and Cobra are armed with all new, sophisticated water launching armaments with exciting color change echo suits. Even now, the future of the Earth hangs in the balance. A lot of people look at Eco Warriors and the concept, and they're just like, ugh, they don't like it. Like I found it as an adult, and as an adult, when I first found it, I didn't like it either. But there was a reason for this, why this sub team, this segment of GI Joe was created. And that's because in the late 80s, early 90s, the environment and the humanity's impact on the planet were a serious topic that was on the minds of most Americans. One thing that was actually rather interesting while we were doing the research for this is we came across a Washington Post article for the 1991 New York Toy Fair, dated February 17th, 1991. What was really interesting was this one paragraph that stated, with few exceptions, the main battlefield, toy-wise, seemed to be on the environmental front, with Captain Planet and Toxic Crusaders moving toward an action figure showdown with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And the Ninja Turtles, they were going to become environauts in their next film that was coming out. Kenner was continuing its Swamp Thing toy line, which was a hideously deformed victim of a toxic accident and now a self proclaimed guardian of the Earth. Even Hasbro's G.I. Joe enlisted with a new line of eco warriors to battle Cobra's contamination of the world's fragile ecosystem. But the article did continue to go on and point out that there were many examples of role play toys that allowed children to actually test the environment for contamination, as well as board games, costumes of the characters from the TV shows and upcoming movies and action figure lines. So, the reason the Eco Wars was created, it was the theme of the time, the environment. It was on Americans' minds.
I think it's a little bit of a stretch to think of Swamp Thing as an eco character, but other brands were already taking existing characters and giving it that eco spin.
So Pat and I were very fortunate to actually have an interview with Vinny DeLeva. He said, here's the thing, the design team did not pick up Eco Warriors. At the time, the planet was a big deal, and one of the things the PR agency told us was, you got to be relevant. So it wasn't even something that the G.I. Joe designers thought of. It was brought in from another from the PR.
That makes a lot of sense. But as we're about to get into here in a second, it was not actually the first time that
Mm-hmm.
environmental conscious characters were proposed
Right.
for G.I. Joe. We actually have some slides that date back to, when is it, 1987?
Yeah, October of
88?
'87 and February of 1988.
If you are pitching something in October of 87 and February of 1988, the way the timeline worked back then, that would have been a part of the 1989 toy line potentially. So there was thought of including some eco characters or an eco character as early as 1989. And why don't you show us the first one?
Pat and I learned about this concept from our departed friend, Gary Head. He was also known as Gyre Viper back on the forums on his tank back in the day. He had come across a former Hasbro employee who had drawn this art. Also, the memory that Pat and I have about this topic is from quite a long ago, so it was a little foggy what we're going by. But this was a group of environment and weather based troopers. And the sculptor who did these concepts felt that these were the foundation for the idea of eco warriors that did come out in 1991.
Yeah,
So, we have this paratrooper that's like a medic.
sometimes whenever you see concept art that didn't end up making it into final form, you'll actually see elements of different things that did come out later.
But yeah, just what Pat said. It's quite often that a toy that we got, for example, in 1992, was originally pitched in 1986, and they decided in 1986 they did not want to do it. And then later on, someone remembered, hey, go get your files. Didn't you make something that might work this year? And they'd pull it out.
Part of the
So,
problem with these is that we're not entirely certain what order to put them in.
but it did make sense the way you did it because you follow the theme of the images, and they all kind of, you can see how this one led to this one, led to this one. So this makes sense.
Yeah, now it is a medic, but he's no longer a skydiver.
Yeah.
And I don't know what sort of hostile environment situation he may be going into, if he is at all at this point.
But it looks like snow. I mean, it looks like he's, pulling a sled, walking through snow. So cold environment is what it looks like to me.
And then this one looks like it's a much worse cold environment where he even now has a face shield and mask.
It's good art. I like the flag blowing in the wind.
At the time, though, I don't think that they were pitching an entire toy line. I think that they were pitching a single character.
Mm-hmm.
And then this next image has me really thrown off. It almost feels like it doesn't go in sequence with the rest.
Well, one thing that's interesting is, this guy is hanging from like a rope, like he's being pulled out of the water. He's being saved. And right behind him's a water spout, a tornado. And the following slides, you'll see that the tornadoes in the background, as well as they use guys hanging from stuff. So you got this guy who's wearing shorts and he's being pulled out of the water, and just below him is a frogman who's reaching up to grab him just as he's getting pulled out of the water.
Yeah, I do get kind of an adventure team feel. I think that
Mm-hmm.
sometimes whenever ideas were being pitched for the 3 3/4 inch line, they may have been slightly informed by their own experiences with the 12-inch G.I. Joes, because some of the people working on 3 3/4 played with 12-inch G.I. Joe as kids.
So, here's the next one. And we do remember that the creator called these the Tornado Twins. So you got a tornado behind them. You have two people that are wearing the same outfit. And then if you look in their hands, once again, they have a rope. And then the next slide, you say have two guys, you have three guys wearing similar outfits. And they're attached to a rope that's attached to a weather balloon that, or a parachute that you could imagine as being the winds of the tornado are picking them up. In the very background, underneath their feet, where they both have their leg lifted up, you can see a third guy in the background next to a little tripod stand thing. So I think those are actually the two same people. Those are the same characters on two different slides.
I do like the way that they have these dome-shaped masks with their mouth just kind of sticking out. It's definitely not like traditional military or anything here. So I think that that is part of what does remind me of Eco Warriors as we move closer and closer to it. And then we have this next one.
I don't know what's going on, but once again, he's hanging from a rope. And, Pat, as you pointed out, it looks almost like you could say there's a guy standing in the open bay of a Tomahawk or a big helicopter. And he's lowering him down into something.
Some of the 12-inch toys may have informed some of these drawings, because again, we're going on foggy memory a little bit, but I remember when I talked to Gary, he was referring to this as the volcano jumper. And I thought, what does a volcano jumper in real life really do? Like, volcano and jumping doesn't sound like a good idea. And so I looked that up, and instantly, if you Google it, the first thing that comes up is G.I. Joe Adventure Team. And that was a 12-inch set, and here we go pitching some ideas that worked in 12-inch, maybe to be translated into 3 3/4.
Right. So they're looking at their past to create product for the future.
And then there is some very dramatic volcano art. This is, I'm sure, mostly meant to set the tone, I would think, of the meeting.
And that makes sense. It implies danger, it implies action.
And then next up, you can kind of see a volcano in the background here. And again, the guy has the grappling hook.
Next, there's two different pieces of art with the exact same bodies, basically.
What are those even called? A fire pole? I don't know what that's called.
I don't know. I don't do a lot of stuff with lava in my job, so.
I think that one of the big features of this toy would have been, number one, a cool helmet, and number two, the thing that is consistent between the two pictures are his shoes. The other thing that I really liked about this art is that it seems that pictures were taken of it as it was still being finished, and there's actually some text. But all of these things we have shown you so far have kind of led to this one character, and the best that I can see is codename Hotfoot, Volcano Assault. So that holds in with what Gary had told me about a volcano jumper.
So, like we said, it's not part of Eco Warriors, but it was a concept about the environment with G.I. Joes. And the designer that created those, he felt it helped when they fleshed out the idea of Eco Warriors.
Okay, so early on in the Eco Warriors, we do have like this one that was sent to Larry Hama.
This was dated April 25th, 1990. And, as Pat said, this was a memo that Hasbro wrote and sent to Larry Hama with a bunch of concept art so that he could start working on the comic as well as the file cards.
It actually refers to the team as the Enviro Raiders. Personally, I think that sounds very Cobra to me, but we've seen some other early names for Eco Warriors. Mark Belamo has shared some inside his book. Various early names for the Eco Warriors are Enviro Raiders, E-Force, Environmental Force, and Enviro Force, but they landed upon Eco Warriors. So the first thing we're going to show you here from 1991 are some of the concept logos that were going to be used. And the first one we have here is for Sludge. It's referred to as Sludge in a couple of photos. One of them's actually in color. But then as we move on, you can see that it also at one point was called Spooge.
Very appropriate.
Yes, very appropriately. I thought that it was a little weird that we didn't end up seeing this Spooge on the packages at all. But yet in the comic book, whenever the Cobras shoot from their weapons, it actually says Splooge.
So, without a doubt, Marvel, Larry Hama, he saw Spooge. Because, as we go on, I don't want to spoil anything, we see the word Spooge quite often. So, and the developmental material was sent to Larry Hama. So, I'm sure he got the idea of splooge from Spooge. And I just liked how he wrote that in the comic, just like, the old 1960s Batmans, pap, zap, bang.
Splooge. Natural progression of things.
Yes.
So we talked about the fact that the name of the team was going to be called the Enviro Force. Here is the concept logo for the Enviro Force. And if it doesn't look familiar to you, maybe it should. It actually does appear on the figures. So while they sort of dropped the Enviro Force name, technically it did make it out to retail. So aside from the logos, it seems that one of the first things they got started working on was the opposition.
So, this first image we're sharing of a character called the Pirate Oil Baron, we want to thank Tim Finn from his blog, A Real American Book. This is something he shared in the past, and he's just more than gracious to allow us to use this image. Highly recommend you go check out his blog. There's a bunch of cool stuff. So basically, this was a early concept for, I guess, the leader of the bad guys, and they believe it was the predecessor for Cesspool.
Yeah, and I found it interesting because the pirate oil baron is actually called out as well under the Cesspool entry in Mark Belamo's book. And according to him, when he talked to Larry Hama about this, Hama said that the name oil baron conjured up images of the TV show Dallas and 10-gallon hats. And he was a little unsure of what Hasbro wanted from the character.
You can see that the character is dropping something out of his left hand, and on that wadded up piece of paper, it does say G.I. Joe.
There are other color images of the pirate oil baron where it looks like he's holding a weapon in that left hand that has a big hose on it that does sort of lead into what we saw with Eco Warriors.
He's holding a cannon that's dripping oil. So he had like an oil launcher, similar to the water accessories that we ended up getting with the toys.
And this collection of paperwork is also related to Cesspool. Whenever these were last all together, the collection was called the CEO. So it seemed that these color images did belong to the accessories that eventually came with Cesspool. But at the same time, Tim Finn has noted on his blog that this may have actually been a 1992 character.
Right, but when you look at this art, you can see that he's carrying a big missile launcher. He has a bolo on his right hip. He has grenades. He has a holster with a pistol right there on his chest. He's wearing knee-high boots with knee pads. So it's like, that's not a leader. That's more importantly, that's not the CEO of a major company.
Because it's also possible that this is some other finished character and that it informed the development of Cesspool. So who is Cesspool?
Cesspool fell into a giant pool of toxic waste while showing one of his chemical plants to a group of environmentalists. The accident left him horribly disfigured and determined to make the world as horrible and as nasty as himself. Cesspool's high-level dirty dealings and corporate subterfuge have made him extremely wealthy. If you're out in the field and HQ radios you that your credit rating just went belly up, you could be sure this man had something to do with it.
I think that him breathing on that G.I. Joe character is kind of hilarious.
Yeah.
He's just so disgusting that instead of using a weapon or anything on Clean Sweep, he just, lifts his mask and goes, in the episode, and that's just so disgusting.
Well, and I like how it shows at the beginning there, he falls into a vat of chemicals. And in the cartoon, he falls into a vat of chemicals because Flint's shot ricochets off a piece of metal. It damages the catwalk and drops him in. So his origin story is the same as the Joker. His original concept name was CEO. He was a chief executive officer of a huge multinational corporation. But for G.I. Joe, CEO actually meant controller of environmental operations. So they changed it.
Wait, where did you get controller of environmental operations? His file card says chief environmental operative.
I'm sorry, that comes off the sculpt sheet.
Okay.
So something to point out, the designer Kurt Groen is the guy who actually created all of the Eco Warriors characters. It was a common practice at the time for Hasbro to use names or to sculpt the characters in the likeness of real individuals. So Cesspool is actually in the likeness of Vinny DeLeva. So as Vinny's pointed out in the past, he doesn't think it was meant to be an insult. It's really meant to be more like a term of endearment. If they make you a bad guy, then it means they must really like you.
Yeah, this is an interesting one because the face in the package, the face in the toy, and the name on the file card all match up to the same person.
Oh, yeah. You're right.
From the Deke cartoon, we have the character model. And you pointed out to me that he has a mutated hand looking through the episode. It comes and goes. There are scenes where it looks like it's a normal hand, but then there are a couple of shots where it does appear to be a clawed hand.
So I really like the way this character looks. I mean, to me, this is a regal character with all the gold, the giant snake, head on the his chest, torso, the shoulder pads. Like, I kind of always imagine it might be kind of cool to swap heads with the Cobra Commander, make this a Cobra Commander figure.
He definitely has a Cobra leader look to him. And this presentation art, we kind of saw that as well inside the insert catalog from 1991. This was in there, only really, really tiny. And I'm not sure which version it was, because as they're developing the characters, there would be the color study, but then in order to take it to the next level, they would do presentation art.
And what's interesting here is we actually have color presentation art twice It's the same pose, but it's actually different colors.
Yeah, so after it gets to the point where they have done the color studies, and it would go on to the next step, which would be the sculpture sheet, where somebody sits down to do a turnaround of the figure as they want it to look to be sent off to a sculptor.
And like I always say, every time we do a presentation where we show a sculpt sheet, this is my absolute favorite step in the pre-production process, because this is the point where they take the action figure from a real life looking human in a dynamic pose doing something to an actual toy. You can see where the rivets are going to be, you can see the joints. And so this is the first time that we get to see what the toy itself looks like. And what I really love about sculpt sheets is the fact that they're black and white. So it really highlights all the details that are often lost when you're looking at a toy that only has like two paint apps where it's all one color with a couple of highlights. So all that detail on the chest and the legs and stuff get blended in because it's all one color. But on the sculpt sheet here, you can actually see those details.
There are some major changes that happened to the accessories from what the initial sculpt sheet was.
So what we have here, it's the frame for the backpack. So the rubber bladder that holds the water is not in this drawing. That would have been on a different drawing. And then also you see his chainsaw. The shield around the chainsaw blade is actually bland. There's nothing on it. But when you look at the toy itself, the toy is covered in so much more detail. So the sculptor would have been given this black and white drawing, and then when the sculptor made a three-dimensional version of the twice the scale, he added extra details.
Yeah, and I wondered if that came down a little bit to functionality, because if you look, there's no supports on the side of the backpack, and those do exist in the finished form. But then where on the finished toy, where the bladder gets inserted from the top, there's actual sculpted detail all across the top that didn't end up on the toy. You see there's this big round thing. That round thing actually did appear on the package art, and Cesspool also appears on the package art for the septic tank, and you can kind of see that his backpack was the same there.
Okay.
Yeah, and something that we haven't talked about up to this point are the knives on his legs, those big blades.
What? Knives?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, huge blades. Going back to the presentation art, you can see them sticking out there behind his left leg. But more than that, we do have an image of the resin figure as it appeared in the Toy Fair catalog, and you can see the spikes. I actually think that they're not attached correctly.
As we discussed, if they were on the back correctly, you wouldn't see them in the catalog.
But it was not dropped before they went to test shot form. I'm interrupting with a quick update. Portions of this video were included as a part of Operation A.R.M.O.R 4, an online event organized by Brian Sauer and Codename Iowa. During that event, Jason Merle of the Order of Battle podcast interviewed Vinny DeLeva and was kind enough to let us insert this interesting clip where Vinny explains the purpose of Cesspool's equipment and how it pertains to his role after the design shifted away from an oil baron.
And there, when I went to go look at the figure designs, and then they took out, what was to eventually be named Cesspool, and were showing me that he was an ex-Timber CEO, and that he had these devices on his ankles that were reminiscent of those kinds of spikes that loggers would do to climb a tree. Okay, his weapon was a chainsaw, and that he was involved with the whole paper industry and fell into, a tank of chemicals like the Joker. Okay. Yeah. Came out disfigured and, changed and maniacal.
Check out more from Jason, Joel, and sometimes A on the Order of Battle podcast by searching at Order of Battle Pod. And look for more great events, such as Assembly Required 2024 at codenameiowa.com. Now, back to the conversation. From the test shot phase, you would move into the engineering pilot. I guess maybe we should explain that a test shot would be done to test how the steel tooling works, whether or not all the parts of the figure work, whether or not they break easily. And then not only do you need to test those, but you also need to test the paint masks to make sure that the way that the paint is being applied is the way that they want it, and that the colors are the colors that they want. And so early on in the production process, some samples are made in low quantities and then sent to Hasbro for approval. And those are called engineering pilots, and the ones that come toward the end would be known as an FEP, which is a final engineering pilot. So we have pictured here a final engineering pilot of Cesspool, where you could see quite a few differences. Do you see any of those yourself?
Yes, because you already told me what they are. Anyway, I'm not the most observant one here, so that's why Pat's always here to help. But, the first thing that pops out for me is the fact the brackets on the lower legs that were to hold those gold daggers is painted gold.
Yeah, you also see the gold on his left wrist. Obviously, the Cobra logo is a lot lighter. You also see that the helmet is unpainted. Through the course of this, we're going to see several FEPs, and they don't have the helmets painted. And I think that's simply because the paint masks for the accessories were probably on a different schedule than the ones for the figure itself. There's kind of an interesting story that makes me sad. Whenever I purchased this figure, it was not broken.
Be honest, you dropped it while playing with him in the bathtub, didn't you?
No, I did not. The legs, the way that they fit into the sockets of the hips is constantly causing that T-bar to put pressure on that front piece of the waist. But the nice thing is that as I was looking at a production figure, I realized that Hasbro addressed that issue. As you can see in this image, that the broken crotch of the FEP does not have a support bar there, and it has been reinforced for the figure that came out. Not only did they reinforce that, but they also changed the legs. On the FEP, you can kind of see this detail on his left leg.
So that's a happy accident. You learned.
I did learn. There's some joy in learning things, but not so much joy in having broken rare figures.
But so this is also, though, this is a really good example of the EP and the FEP process, and the aspect that, they made a resin, they made the steel mold, they made the figure, and then they went through all the rigid testing, and they found out that this particular figure has a weakness on the lower torso, and the legs are too bulky, I guess. So they were able to correct it before it was mass produced and sent out to children, and then they didn't have to replace, 500,000 of them.
Yeah, that's right. And then the backpack and squirter are also a little different.
So we haven't gone into it yet, but the original concept for all of these characters was instead of shooting water, they were actually going to shoot slime. But these figures were engineered to have a thicker, more viscous material than water inside them. So here you can see the figure on the right of the backpack is the one we got, while the one on the left was the FEP. And the one on the left basically just does not have that notch to keep the bladder from falling out of the top. And the guns there actually had a larger diameter boring at the end so it could shoot that fluid. And when they got rid of the slime and changed it to water, and then they added the color changing paint applications to all the figures, they made it a smaller opening on that gun because the water would leak out quicker, so they needed to be a finer point so it could shoot farther.
That's consistent. We'll see that when we look at other FEPs.
Mm-hmm.
But then here's actually a carded sample of Cesspool. The accessories are actually called out, and these images are courtesy of Brian Kaufman. It says, includes acid chainsaw, helmet, spikes, decimator spray backpack, and decimator spray shooter. The call out on the side actually was identifying accessories that were not included with the final figure.
For me, that cemented in the fact that there were going to be 2 blades, one for each leg.
Okay, let's pause there. Don't miss next time when we'll take a look at the rest of the 1991 Eco Warriors and more. But for now, I'd like to thank Chris Murray and everyone who's helped with the Articulated Points Eco Warriors series.
Thanks for watching this episode of Articulated Points. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'd appreciate it if you would like, share, and subscribe. If you'd like to learn more about some of the toys featured in this episode or want to follow us on social media, links are in the description below this video.